Bookish friends, welcome to my second video in the books of Alfred Hitchcock series. I'm going to talk about three books that were adapted into Alfred Hitchcock films and try to compare those books with the movies that Alfred Hitchcock directed. Like I did in my first video, I will insert the clips that I used in my wrap-ups so that my views about those books would be fresh. In this video, I will first of all give my thoughts about the play written by Noel covered, The Easy Virtue. This play was adapted into a movie directed by Alfred Hitchcock in 1927. The second book that I will talk about is The Manxman by Caine. This book was adapted into a 1929 film directed by Alfred Hitchcock. This was the last silent film that is directed by Alfred Hitchcock. The next work that I'm going to talk about is also a play, Juno and Paycock, a play written by Chastiny G. And this movie is actually the first Talkie that Alfred Hitchcock directed. Not being a fan of silent films in general, I'm actually very glad that we are done with the silent movies that are adaptations of written works. The second work that I finished today was the stage play that I read for Books of Alfred Hitchcock project. This month I read the stage play The Easy Virtue by Noel Coward, who was apparently a very famous playwright in those times. This play was adapted into the movie of the same name, directed by Alfred Hitchcock in 1928. In this play, we mainly follow a family obsessed with morals and society norms, with the exception of the father. And when the son of the family comes back home with his new bride, who was a divorced woman and much more older than him, the family tries to cope with this new reality, and the struggles that each character faces is given in the play. Unlike the other three books that I've read for this project, I really didn't like this stage play at all. The only redeeming quality was the ending, which I cannot tell because of the spoilers. The play dragged on and on about the same things. I felt like I was preached on the hypocrisy of the family, which was evidently true, but it was the only plot point which made it very boring to read for me. I could have liked it better if I had seen the stage play, but I'm not even sure about that, because the pacing of the play is also very odd. The Easy Virtue by Noel Coward was a very disappointing read for me, and at least I'm glad it did not take me very long to read this stage play. To sum it up, I gave The Easy Virtue by Noel Coward a 5 out of 10. The play Easy Virtue by Noel Coward was adapted 2 times into a movie. The first one is the 1927 version, which I will talk about, directed by Alfred Hitchcock. And the second one is actually a very loosely based adaptation, which was produced in 2008. In this 1927 silent movie version, Isabel Jeans, Franklin Doyle, and Eric Bransby Williams have the starring roles. This movie had differences from the play. And I thought those changes were very, very clever. There was an addition of a courtroom scene which made it quite exciting actually. It talked about the past of this woman with easy virtue. I think that the actress in this movie had the best acting that I have seen in the silent movies that I watched directed by Alfred Hitchcock. There were some signature scenes that foreshadowed the brilliance of Alfred Hitchcock in this movie, including some great shots in the beautiful mansion, and also Hitchcock played with the light, which shows much better in black and white movies. In summary, I actually like this silent movie version much better than the play that I read. I gave the silent movie version a 6 out of 10. Like I said before, I thought the changes that were made were clever and made us feel about the characters much more. And I finished my May book for Books of Alfred Hitchcock project, The Manxman by Caine. This book was the oldest book that I read from this project, and it was written in the Victorian period. This book takes place on Isle of Man, and it is basically a story of a love triangle. Philip, his illegitimate cousin Pete, and Kate do grow up together in the island, and the three become inseparable. One day, Pete, who's a fisherman, decides to make a living for himself, goes abroad to make a fortune. But before going away, he sort of becomes betrothed to Kate. Pete also asks Philip to take care of Kate, but after a couple of years, Philip and Kate start to develop feelings towards each other. And they try to fight these feelings, but of course they are unable to do it. And when Pete comes back with a fortune and wants to marry Kate, things take a very different turn than what Philip and Kate had originally planned. My first comment about this book is that it needed to be shorter, at least by half. I think this book would have been a much better book if the story was wrapped up in about 250 pages. Though the story is very cliché and contains many Victorian dramatic elements, I found the characters and the way that their feelings for each other in terms of friendship, affection, comradeship, love, very good. So it was different from a classic tragedy in that way, and I could not help but love the character of Pete because he was incredibly kind and his love for Kate was admirable. The atmosphere of the book and the island was described very well, though I found some of the details a bit unnecessary. So in summary, I gave this book a 7 out of 10. The Manxman was adapted into a movie just once by Alfred Hitchcock in 1929. Like I said before, it was the last silent movie directed by him. And it stars Annie Sindra, Carl Barrison and Malcolm Caine. Because The Manxman was such a long book, the movie cut out some scenes and omitted some of the characters. But it was actually quite faithful regarding the main story, which was the love triangle. But because the book had very strong characters and the inner thoughts of the characters were very prominent in the book, I thought the characters in the movie were a bit two-dimensional. I really could not get the agony that Philip suffers from falling in love with his best friend's fiancé, and the sweetness of Pete's love was not given as well as it was presented in the book. Acting, contrast to the previous movie that I watched, was the worst that I've seen in the silent films, especially Malcolm Caine, who was actually very decent in The Lodger, which I covered in the previous video, was so over the top. I actually could not watch him in some of the scenes. The best thing about this movie was the cinematography. Because the movie was shot in the location, the Isle of Man, it used some of the very beautiful scenes in the island. And there were some really clever shots by Alfred Hitchcock, of course. There was a scene in which we were in the place of the character, seeing what was happening behind a glass door. Very, very clever. And like in the previous movie, the use of light in black and white movies was done professionally. In summary, I gave this movie a 5 out of 10 because of the horrendous acting. And I finished the play, which was on my TBR on June for Books of Alfred Hitchcock project, Juno and the Paycock by Sean O'Casey. This play was adapted into a movie titled the same, the Juno and the Paycock, a silent movie. And I will mention more about comparison with the play and the movie in my special video, which I will cover 3 of his movies. This play is written by a very famous Irish dramatist in 1924. This play has been produced for many years all throughout the world, and in this play an Irish matriarch, Juno Boyles, tries to keep her husband and her children safe from the ongoing conflict in the Ireland during the 1920s. Her husband, Captain Jack Boyle, is a man who has foolish schemes, who prefers to drink instead of finding a job for himself. And their son was injured during the conflict between Ireland and United Kingdom. A few years before this play takes place, Juno and her daughter are the ones looking after their family. But one day, a lawyer comes to Boyle's house and says that they have inherited a will from a second cousin of Jack's, and their life, their hopes, and of course the neighborhood's view on the Boyle family changes with these news. I thought this play was more realistic than most of the plays that I read, because the online edition that I read also had a very detailed introduction chapter. I learned many things from the time period and the conflict between Ireland and England from this introduction, actually. And I really enjoyed the plot. It was both dramatic and also funny at parts. I enjoy those kinds of plays much more than very dramatic or very ha-ha funny plays. I also thought the characters were quite complex, with the exception of a few characters. And lastly, although the play had a very clear political agenda, I liked the fact that it showed the very bad effects of violence and conflict on the people's psychology. So overall, I gave Juno and the Paycock a 7 out of 10. Juno and the Paycock, a play by Sean O'Casey, was adapted into screen actually 4 times. The first one is the 1929 version, which I will talk about. And it was adapted into TV movies 3 times. First in 1938, then in 1960, and then in 1980. This play was adapted by Alfred Hitchcock in terms of story as well, and the scenario was written by his wife Alma Reville. The movie stars Sarah Oldgood, Edward Chapman, and Barry Fitzgerald. Movie that I could find free did not have a very good quality, because the story takes place in Ireland and all of the actors had Irish accents. I actually needed the subtitles badly. If I had not read the play previously, I certainly would not have understood anything from the plot, but because I read the play, I could follow what was happening. This was the most faithful work that I watched in this video series. The plot is very dramatic and tragic, and it also covers some political issues. They were actually given very well in this adaptation too. Because this was the first movie with sound, the acting was downplayed, but most probably Alfred Hitchcock used theater actors for this movie. As you know, theater acting needs a bit overacting than movie acting. But Edward Chapman, who played Peacock, the husband, the father, was really good. I really liked him. He did not overact. But this time there was no clever tricks done by Alfred Hitchcock in this movie. It was sort of like a video recording of a play produced in the theater. So overall, I did not want to decrease my rating because of the very bad quality of the surviving work, and considered it like I understood what was being said, and gave the adaptation a 6 out of 10. So those were the second 3 books that were adapted into Alfred Hitchcock movies. This project made me both read and watch some projects out of my comfort zone so far. In the following books, the books will be mostly mystery and suspense, and the quality of the movies will be much better, of course. But I'm actually very glad that this experience made me appreciate some of the things that I would not even consider reading or watching. I'm always up for such a challenge. So please comment down below what do you think of Alfred Hitchcock movies, and what is your favorite Alfred Hitchcock movie. Mine is The Birds, and I have a long list of movies to watch to come to my favorite movie, and maybe my favorite will change after this project, who knows. And if you're a new viewer, first of all, welcome. Please like and subscribe. Hope to see you very soon. Bye. As for Turkish word of the day, I'm going to choose virtue. Virtue means erdem in Turkish, and erdem is our Turkish word of the day. Have a good day.